Ngowi TV, informed economists and business perspective.
Basically, let's assume we have, within some few minutes, exhausted industrialization at global level, at SADC level, at Africa continental level, and ESC. Let's zero in into Tanzania and see a little bit, what is the shape? Industrialization in Tanzania is capturing quite a lot of areas, including in the Tanzania Development Vision 2025. It's coming to the end only some 4 years to come, and I know there are already plans to talk about the Tanzania Development Vision 2050, and I've been involved in some preliminary discussions. We have had 5 years development plan, all of those really focusing into industrialization, especially the second and the third one. The first one was not so much, but the second and the third one. The ruling party election manifesto, both the 2015 and 2020, industrialization is appearing a lot of times. In the 2015, I think it appears over 70 times. I do counts. I believe in numbers. We see presidential speeches. If you see I'll walk you through the speech that was given by the late President Magufuli in Parliament. It should have been sometimes November 2015. Almost over 40%, I think, of the speech was industrialization, etc., etc. So, but contrary to what maybe some people might think, especially young men and women who do not have a gray hair, like me, like Professor Bay, they might think that it is today we have been starting to talk about industrialization. It's wrong. Tanzania has been doing a lot of efforts to industrialize since independence, since the political independence of 1961. Of course, if you have to go back into history, it could have been even before. But I'm choosing this time frame, from 1961. What have we seen in terms of efforts? The first big effort we saw well back in 1964 in the first year development plan. And here the focus was mainly by private sector. Remember, those who might remember, Tanzania had 3 epochs almost. When this country turned 50, I was asked to write a piece on Tanzanian journey, economic journey for the past 50 years. I divided it into 3, 1961 to 1967, 67 to mid-1980s, 1980s to now. Now you can see 1964, it is still within the first epoch of development, where, it was a country that had just come from independence. Really, we were still in our independence honeymoon, and so we still continued with the private sector-led economy. And so even the industrialization efforts of the time, we are private sector-led. And it's very important to note this because we are going to see a huge departure in 1967. So this 1964, it was private sector-led, and of course, given the nature of the private sector then, it was mainly foreign private sector. Again, if you have to go by ethnicity, maybe mainly Asian and Europeans. But in this time, we saw what I call ISI, import substitution industrialization. It is the time when Nyerere saw we are doing a lot of imports. Let us import substitute. Produce domestically to substitute imports. And it has a lot of economics, in terms of saving the scarce foreign currency that was there by that time. And of course, incentives were given. And it's very important to understand that incentives have been given since 1964 because there are a lot of debates now on incentives that are being given to investors today. And I'm saying this out of experience. I've been the member of the board of directors at the Tanzania Investment Center up to 2015. I've written a lot on attracting investment, giving investment incentives, giving or not giving. And here you could see as far back as 1964, incentives were given, both fiscal and non-fiscal. It's an area, again, that falls very dear to me. We could talk and talk, but Itaji is going to remove me here if I start talking. We spare that for another conference, maybe. Now, another epoch that we saw in terms of development of industrialization in Tanzania is 1967. Yeah, those of us who are old enough, in 1967, we saw what I call a U-turn in Tanzania development effort. What we saw was nationalization of what was a private sector. We saw embracing of what I call a Marxist-Leninist orientation of economy. We saw state-owned enterprises, including now industries, We saw effort, ujamaa, self-reliance, and industrialization, of course, was specifically influenced and shaped by the policies of the time. But unfortunately, there was no action plan. And this is one of very important lessons. If we have to industrialize and industrialize successfully, yes, it's one thing having a plan, but really having implementation matrix, implementation framework is another thing. So there was no much success, really. Unfortunately, there was no much success. Then, in the second development plan of 1969, we saw at least a detailed action plan. It is a learning nation. We learned in the first one, we missed the action plan. In the second, there was action plan. And really, the focus was on small-scale import substitution industrialization for, of course, intermediate products, agro-processing, and its false natural. Agro-processing, given the fact that this is a country which is basically agrarian in nature. So it was really natural. And it was labor-intensive, given the state of capital, machinery, equipment, and automation that was in place. And this is very important, again, when it comes to jobs creation. But again, unfortunately, there was a slow process, slow progress for quite a lot of reasons. So, Tanzania has not been short of supply when it comes to plans. 1974, we added the third development plan. Within the industrialization space, we saw agro-processing. Naturally, again, given the nature of the economy in Tanzania, which is agrarian in nature. And of course, when I'm talking about this, a lot of cooperatives, I understand, they are within the agrarian space. It's only these days that we are seeing a lot of financial-based cooperative, the SACCOs and all those. Yeah, ask us with some gray hair, we'll tell you, really, the fathers of cooperatives, I would say it is mainly agrarian. I'm not really an expert of cooperatives, so talking about cooperatives in this conference here, I'm putting myself at risk with Professor Bear and other experts on cooperatives in the house. But I've taken that chance. So we saw effort again for import substitution in this time. So, and what's the purpose again? It's exactly, we are importing, we don't have enough foreign currency. Let us produce for import substitution. And the focus again was on employment creation, both direct and indirect and staff. Now, we had a second major U-turn in Tanzania development efforts, and for that matter, in the industrialization efforts in 1980s. Some would say 1984, 85, I normally call it mid-1980s. What did we see here? What we saw here is a major change in the management of the economy in Tanzania. We saw privatization of what was nationalized well back in 1967. We saw a lot of a divestiture process. Over 400 state-owned enterprises were put into a divestiture process and we are privatized. And it's very important to understand this because remember we nationalized and then we privatized. And now, reading Professor Kitilia Mkumbo, there are some industries again that have been nationalized or rather taken back for some reasons. Because when we privatized, it was on conditions. Some of those industries have turned into go downs and stuff. It might not be a topic for today. But then, remember, mid-1980s, we saw other efforts, mainly in the form of industrialization. And we have seen a lot of industries that have been privatized. Now, the question is, did they deliver? Did they perform? Are they sleeping giants? Those kind of stuff. Go to Morogoro, go to Moshi, and Moshi, this is my home. My home is Kibosho, just some few kilometers from here. I understand in the good old days when industries were industries in Moshi. I remember the good old days when industries were industries in Morogoro. Now, has privatization saved us or not? I'm posing this for debate later. In this time again, we saw, of course, Vision 2025, small industries, sustainable industries development plan, etc., etc., etc. So what I'm saying here, we have seen some successes, but also we have seen some failures. Yeah, it's very important to put this way. So within the Tanzania Development Vision 2025 space, it's a document around 42 pages. If you read the fifth objective is building a strong and competitive economy, and the aim is to create a strong, diversified, resilient, and a competitive economy. And when I was going through the themes of today, you see issues of resilience within cooperatives. You see issues of diversification and stuff. So the aim is not just having industries, but having industries that can compete within the globe. And the third target of the fifth objective is having semi-industrialized economy with a substantial industrial sector comparable to a typical middle-income economy. We attained the middle-income economy already. You know, when we are looking at our industries, are they comparable? Again, I'll leave this here for discussion. If you read the CCM election manifesto 2020, and I'm saying this because this is the ruling party, it is 308 pages, and you know, you see industrialization appearing 180 times. 180 times. It's very important to put these things in context because whatever we are going to do, it will be, you know, it will be reflected. Issues including, of course, priorities on building modern, inclusive, and competitive industrial economy, stimulating economic development and growth. So really, it's not just having industries, but then there's industries bringing about growth. And it's not only about posting growth. Is this growth bringing in development? You know, economic development and economic growth, these are two separate things. You might post growth of 7%, 8%, the way Tanzania has been doing all along, which is above the 4% of sub-Saharan Africa, but it has not been so much really poverty reducing. It has not been so much you know, jobs creating. It has not been so much inclusive. So those are part of issues here. Now, if you read 5 years development plan 3, which saw the light of the day only a few months ago, July 2021, you see, of course, it is 189 pages, and the theme is realizing competitiveness and industrialization for human development. I'll skip quite a lot of things in interest of time, and because I'm seeing some issues now are starting to recur. But if you read chapter 5 of this plan, you are seeing strategic interventions for industrialization and promoting industrialization for economic growth, you know. You see, again, issues of, you know, aiming to become a middle-income economy. Of course, we are there already. There are issues of discussions here. You know, again, now we are at lower middle income. I'm skipping some details here. I'll also skip some details here because, again, we are seeing some repetitions here. Again, if you see some other efforts, of course, including industrial sector GDP contribution, issues of employment, private sector investment, and this is very important to remember because between 1967 to mid-1980, it was industrialization which was state-led. It was state-led under SOEs, state-owned enterprises, you know. Now we are moving into, you know, private sector. We saw, again, efforts on protecting industries. I've been doing a lot of budget analysis, maybe for the past 15 years or so, and actually I've been advising the Parliamentary Committee on Budget. Now there are issues of protectionism. Now it's a debate, really. Should we protect industries? How much should we protect, you know? Should we protect inefficiencies? And if we protect, yeah, protection can be a bad deal to consumers. As a consumer, I want competition. Yeah, I believe competition is healthy to consumers, but will it also be healthy to economies? These are issues that can be discussed later. Again, we see really the type of industries that are wanted in Tanzania are jobs-creating industries, value-adding, you know, those that will be for domestic consumption, exporting, and those that will be using domestic raw material. Within jobs-creating industries, there are a lot of debate here. You know, I do teach production theory, labor, capital-intensive, and the debate is, so long as we want industries that will be producing jobs, it's like we want labor-intensive industries. But as an industrialist, I want capital-intensive, I want mechanization, I want speed, you know. So there is a conflict here. So really, this tells me, if we are to have industries that will be jobs-creating, indeed, we should think about industrial ecosystem. We should think about creating jobs along the industrial value chains and nodes, not really in a specific factory. A modern factory will be the one where I press button and I get things there. So I think we can skip and it can come to discussion. Issues of producing for domestic consumption. The test that I put is quite a lot of us. Yeah, it's a question of I use the theory of consumer behavior to discuss this. Yeah, to what extent our sons and daughters in Tanzania are inclined to use domestically produced goods and services. And my students, and I see quite a lot of them here, the test that I give them is, let's look among ourselves. Allow me to embarrass almost all of us here. Look at what we are wearing in terms of textile and shoes. How many of us are wearing Tanzanian-made industrial products? We can discuss that later. But I'm seeing the bags, actually. Yes, the bags have adhered to this. Maybe they knew that I'm going to speak about this one. So let's move on.